views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Bronxnet or the program underwriters.
Coming up on today's verdict, the recent Ebola scare has demonstrated a breakdown in the way our emergency rooms treat the sick. Why did this happen? What should you do if a mistake has been made as a result of medical malpractice? It's an important topic, and we have much to discuss, so stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. Hello and welcome to today's verdict, the show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney for the next 30 minutes, David Lesh. My guest tonight is an attorney who concentrates in medical malpractice and is also an alumnus of St. John's Law School, just like yours truly. We proudly welcome Robert Fallarino to the show. Robert.
Thank you very much, David.
Nice
Pleasure to be here.
Listen, I'm not the biggest fan of emergency rooms, but certainly if I went into one, I wouldn't like to be shown the door and told to come back if I was still sick. Does this seem to happen fairly often?
Well, it just happened down in Dallas just a couple of weeks ago with the Ebola case. And unfortunately, it does happen, and that's why communication in healthcare is the most important thing for the patients to know about.
All right, let's take a step back, because we'll forget about the Ebola for a second, but let's talk about somebody who just isn't feeling well and they go into an emergency room for whatever the reason is. When they walk through those doors, who's the first person they even see?
The first person you'll see is a sort of a triage nurse, someone who will get your information, who you are, why you're here, and take some very basic information, and also will take an initial blood pressure and listen to your heart.
Okay, now that person, that's not the person that's checking you in, really, at the glass.
The first person that checks you in is actually an administrator. Yeah.
Okay, and then the administrator takes your name down, and then somehow a nurse comes out and says, okay, it's your... Can you come back?
And when you go back, there's usually someone who will take some initial vitals at an initial way station on the way in, and then you're sent back to the waiting room, and then eventually you'll be taken back to where you're at a cot or a bed.
Okay, so now you're there. You're at that area now where where some of the beds are. Who's talking to you? Are there many nurses? Is there one nurse? Is there a special nurse?
Initially, it's an initial nurse who presents and will ask, why are you here? That would be the most simple question. Why are you here? And then we'll go through those vitals once again and make sure that the information is correct and create somewhat of an initial chart.
Right, so why is that history? Why is that so important?
The history is actually the most important thing. That is, when you're a patient, you have to make sure that the people who are taking care of you know why you're there. And you have to express it, and you have to keep expressing it, not just to the first nurse, but to everyone who comes through the door. You can't assume they're talking to each other.
Now, we know you do medical malpractice. Is it common for patients to walk into the ER and not give their full history for whatever, they're embarrassed or for whatever the reason is?
There's two types of people. There's people that hold doctors in such high esteem or nurses in such high esteem that they expect that they'll know why I'm here just by sitting there and being there. And so those are the kind of people that they have to make sure they elicit the information from. There's the other people who are afraid to ask the follow-up questions. So it's very important that when you're there, that you express to them why you're there. And if you need help to do that, you bring someone with you who can communicate and can listen to the questions as well.
I don't really know that much that what really transpired with this gentleman with the Ebola who ended up passing away. But you wonder if when he walked into the emergency room, did he tell them where he had spent the last couple of weeks in Africa and who he was treating? That would be consistent with history, am I correct?
That's exactly right. And that was the most important piece of history, because in Dallas, Texas, you wouldn't expect there to be a patient with Ebola. But if you're coming from West Africa, that's something you should expect. It's a phrase we use in the courthouse all the time. If you hear hoofs, you think of horses. Well, if you're coming from Africa, you might think of zebras, and that's what they should have been thinking of, Ebola, and could this be Ebola, and work them up for it. If you're wrong, there's no harm. If you're wrong and that he doesn't have Ebola, but if he does have Ebola and you send him out into the community, well, then you have a problem on
Now,
your
I know
hands.
some people are embarrassed sometimes. They say, well, you know, I took this drug, it may have been illegal or something else, but it's so important, isn't it, to tell the doctor whatever it is that's bothering you and whatever you may have in your system and your past history. It's just one of the most important things.
It is crucially important because your number one objective at that point is to get better. Okay, and however you get better, however that comes about, you have to communicate that in an appropriate way.
All right, so after the nurse takes a look at you and you get some vitals taken and you maybe hopefully a history, I assume a doctor somehow shows up, correct?
Eventually we'll walk through.
Okay, what is this doctor called? An emergency room physician, something
Exactly. An emergency room physician, sometimes they're called attendings. Sometimes in more of a teaching hospital, there'll be a resident first and then an actual physician.
Do you sometimes get all three or just getting one?
You usually get one.
All right. Now, and by the way, these particular doctors have a ton of experience, they don't have a ton of experience. Let's be honest, who are we dealing with here?
It actually varies, okay, and it does vary across the spectrum. So you can't assume that they're the most experienced doctor in the world, and you can't assume that they're the least experienced. But you do have to, and we're going to say this a lot, you have to communicate. You have to say what's wrong to everyone that's there, and you have to express it in a way that they understand that you're here not as someone who comes here every day, but I came to the hospital because something's really wrong, and that's not like me, and I'm here and I need help.
Okay, let's talk about tests, right?
Okay.
You need some tests done. The doctor obviously takes a look at you. What kind of tests are usually performed in the hospital?
Well, the obvious initial one is what's called a complete blood count, a CBC, where they'll draw blood, and they'll just look for something very simple, like is the white blood cell elevated? Do you have an infection? And then you may have a urine analysis to look to see if there's an infection in your urine. Of course, if you come in with chest pain, well, then you're going to do an EKG or something, as a first step.
And what is that, just for basic?
That's just called an electrocardiogram, and that's just putting electrodes on your chest to get the electrical activity of the heart.
All right, so now you have a broken bone. Where are you going for that?
You're going for X-ray.
X-ray,
Very
right?
simple, a straight, old-fashioned X-ray.
Okay, so now you get your tests done, and hopefully you still have your room or wherever you are, on a cot or wherever you are, and you get the results, right? They usually discharge you if they don't feel it's something that's so inherently dangerous that they need to admit you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
When you're discharged, do they usually give you a follow-up with somebody at the hospital? Do they tell you just to rest? What usually goes on?
Usually you get a sheet of paper that says it's a discharge instruction, and they will say if it's a clinic situation, come back to the clinic in 2 days or 1 week. That's your responsibility. But most important, your responsibility, which they don't give you, is those test results you just spoke about. You want to make sure you leave with your test results, so wherever you do go, then you're not starting at square one.
Now, can you say, I'm the patient, can you give me my results in my hand, or were they going to say, well, you have to order them first, you have to pay for them first?
Well, if you want the actual X-ray or the actual hard copy, the answer to that is yes. But you're entitled to get the report. You're entitled to get the piece of paper that says what they did to you and what their results were.
By the way, am I mistaken, but if there is an issue that should be treated in the hospital, they can send you, and they should send you to a specialist. Am I correct?
Absolutely, and if it's a full-service hospital, there's community hospitals, and then there's what we call tertiary or more advanced hospitals. But either way, they should have, like when we spoke about the heart, they should have a cardiologist. And so a cardiologist is a specialist, a heart doctor that will come to you, and then if there's an EKG finding, if there's something that's wrong on the EKG, can then go on to more tests.
Let's talk about some other specialists. Who else do you have there in the hospital?
You have an orthopedist, which is a bone specialist for the fractured bone. Okay. You have someone who would specialize in kidneys if you have a kidney stone, and that's called a nephrologist. So those are the basic kind of physicians that you'll see. And you also, when we were talking about infection before, there'll be infectious disease specialists.
Now, in your experience, and I know you've handled a ton of these types of cases, where does the breakdown seem to be when you're dealing with this emergency room? Is it when you first come in and the nurse? Is it the emergency room doctor, the attendee? Is it the specialist, the neurologist, the orthopedist? Where do you think it usually is?
The problem in the breakdown is the self-fulfilling prophecy. Whatever they think of first seems to travel with the patient. So that's why communication is very important. You have to tell them what's wrong and how it hurts and how it's different. because otherwise they may just say, you know what, he's got a stomach virus, and send you home. Meanwhile, you had a hole in your stomach that's leaking into your abdomen. They're two worldly different outcomes for those two patients. Whereas if you just don't express it in the right way, they'll think, you got a stomach virus, go home.
Okay, let's talk about the person who goes home, like this Ebola patient, and they're feeling not so good. Where do they go? Do they go back to that hospital? Do they go to a clinic? Because we're going to talk about a little bit about the healthcare system generally, but where should the person usually go?
If you have a local physician, your own private healthcare physician, your own private doctor, that is a good first step. The most important thing not to do is to say, I just went to the emergency room, I must be okay. The most important thing to do is to follow up. If you're not right, if you don't feel it's right, go somewhere. You can go back to the same place if it's close and nearby. I always recommend going someplace else, but that's, you might get a different emergency room doctor and take you more seriously if that's the right approach.
And would you say the next day, a couple days later?
As soon as you know it's not right, you go back. Okay, and that would be the next day or even hours later.
So, let me ask you a question. The benefit of bringing somebody with you, a relative, somebody else, yes, no?
That's an immeasurable benefit. That is, because think of it in the reverse. If you get bad news, you'll hear a bad word and you'll know that's bad news and you shut down. You don't hear it. You just hear people talking. Whereas the relative, a close friend, someone you trust will be the person that will know, hey, they said this, we have to go do this now.
Right, remember, they might say, hey, if you still have these symptoms tomorrow and you still have the headache, come back, you may have the concussion or the post-concussive syndrome, that type of thing.
Exactly. Whereas if you're not fully listening because you're nervous about what's going on, they are there to not only be your ears, but also to be your voice, to ask the follow-up questions that you're not asking.
All right, where does it seem to be that one of your clients realizes, you know what, somebody didn't treat me the proper way, doctor, nurse, specialist, whomever. When does that usually click on in somebody's mind? A week later, 2 weeks later, 6 months later? When do you think?
It depends on the condition. Okay. Obviously, if it's a heart attack, people will know that fairly soon. Let's use a cancer situation with patients with mammography or going for mammography. They would know that they were misdiagnosed or they didn't have the right diagnosis for almost a year later, and that would be a problem for you at that point.
All right, Robert, we got a lot more to get to, but we do have to take a quick break. But when we come back, we will continue discussing our healthcare system. Stay right with us.
If I got to go to college, oh my goodness, I like discovering new things. You get to see what works for you and what doesn't. That helps you evolve as a person. And you get to make like a supernova of skill or talent or whatever it is. I've always wanted to go to college. I just feel like that's my destiny. My name is Queen, and I am your dividend.
Know what?
What?
Since I got adopted, I've learned a lot about these humans.
I know. I mean, check out these two. It's Flirt City over here.
Yeah, I noticed that. It looks like my human is definitely into your human.
Oh, look! I think she's getting his number.
Nice.
Your human's got some sweet moves.
Takes after his dog. Oh, look, they're doing that thing where they put their arms around each other.
She kicked up a leg. It's like in the movies.
That's awesome. Looks like we're going to be hanging out a little bit more.
Jimmy can't sing, and Tommy can't dance, so we're gonna put some ants in their pants. Aww.
Kids will spend 22 minutes watching us, the super duper party troopers, sing about ants in their pants.
Isn't that funny? Ants in their pants, they got ants in their pants, they got ants in their pants.
Brushing for 2 minutes now can save your child from severe tooth pain later. 2 minutes, twice a day. They have the time.
A single ember from a wildfire can travel over a mile. That ember can ignite and destroy your home or community. You can't control where that ember will land. Only what happens before it does. Visit fireadapted.org to learn how you can help protect your community from wildfires.
Welcome back to today's Verdict. I'm David Lesh. Remember to stay in touch with us on Facebook and Twitter, and you can always see past episodes on bronxnet.org. Let's take a look at a video recorded before the last presidential election so we can comment on what has since transpired. Take a look.
The Affordable Health Care Act will add 30 million people to the healthcare rolls in 2014. We're already short tens of thousands of physicians across the country, especially in primary care. That number is escalating dramatically. It means that your wait for a primary care visit will get longer and longer, and you will more than likely not be seeing a physician but a nurse practitioner if there are any available, because they too are in very short supply. Now, here are my suggestions of what you must do soon so that you minimize the adverse effects which you are already noticing if you have made an appointment to see your family doctor or general internist recently. 1, be sure to establish a relationship with a primary care provider now. Whether you think you need it or not, don't wait. Many doctors' panels will be closed as they're overrun with new patients. They're not going to accept you. Number 2, make your annual appointment months in advance and start on this now. Don't wait. Women may need annual physical exams, and men, well, come on, man, don't wait until you're sick. Men tend to avoid preventive visits. Do not make that mistake anymore, guys. You will not have the luxury of suddenly noticing something and thinking that you'll see a doctor in a few days or weeks. Try months and months for a wait. You don't want to do that. You want to start doing things in an anticipatory fashion. Number 3, think every year from now on that what your insurance will cover is going to decrease and that your costs are going to climb with each new annual renewal of your insurance. And this should be a given whether you're an employee of a company or self-employed and buy your insurance individually. Costs are going to increase. In fact, they may skyrocket, and this will probably occur even if the Affordable Health Care Act were to be repealed, and much of it is never going to be repealed. Let me assure you, that's like a pipe dream. Even if Romney is elected, it will just be given a different name. For example, if you think that insurance companies will be allowed to reverse coverage of your kids through age 26, you're dreaming. Parents will rebel. If you think that insurance companies will be allowed to reject your application for coverage because you have a pre-existing condition, which the Affordable Health Care Act has now changed, and you think they're going to do it like they used to, dream on. It ain't happening. It is not going to be reversed, but someone, and that's you, will have to pay for this. So get ready to put aside more of the little dollars that you earn and putting them aside for health care. Getting free care will become much harder. So you may feel fine right now, but you need to put some cash aside. I warn you. Also, get whatever you need done, like tests, this insurance year. You know what it will cost now and that it's covered. You have no idea down the road. So don't delay the MR scan or the blood test that your doctor has recommended. 4, and I really mean this, listen to my show. Check out the health information that you can get on KTAR.com and on drb.tv and on my Facebook fan page. You're going to have to become much more proactive in your health. This is an issue because Americans, unless they're sick, do not see health care as a priority. You will not be able to count on your doctor's office as your key source of information about your health and the health of your family. You need to know about natural therapies because they're often cheaper and do not require a prescription. And since you won't be getting into a doctor's office, you may need to get something fast. This is important because you will find it harder and harder and harder to get that prescription from your doctor. You will need to learn about traveling elsewhere to get care. You will need to learn about medical tourism. You will need to learn about what to do when the government and insurance companies turn your care needs down. And this is going to happen because there are millions more insureds and less money. You will need to learn about where to access a doctor, what is the easiest place to get a doctor, and you may have to travel a darn good distance to get the care that you need. I can go on, but I hope that you get the point. Listen up. This is Dr. Sam Benjamin with medical news that you can use.
We're back on set talking health care and being a proactive patient with our guest, Robert Fallarino. Robert, we're looking at that video. I mean, there's so much to digest there. I don't even know where to start. Just the fact that, we know that Romney didn't win the election. Obamacare is alive and well. But really what I'm concerned with is our health care system better off now since the taking of that video or the making of that video, from a medical malpractice perspective, or have things really basically stayed the same?
I agree with you. Things have basically stayed the same and have stayed the course, so to speak, since the election. But some of the things he said in terms of being a proactive patient is what we were saying in the first segment, is that's still the important thing. Whether it's crowded or empty, you have to speak your mind and you have to communicate your problems. But from a medical malpractice standpoint, that is something that we have to be on guard for, is an overcrowded emergency room where a doctor can't pay as much attention. You have to be on guard and make sure that they do pay attention.
Okay, so you're going to put on your hat now and your role as a plaintiff's attorney. You're going to be taking somebody's case. Somebody walks into your office now and they basically say, I think I have a case. Because isn't that how it always starts? I think I have a case.
Absolutely.
I think I have a medical malpractice case. What do you say? How do you start it, really?
Okay. Well, how it starts is, luckily at Pegalis and Erickson, we have a nurse on staff, and we have, someone like myself will interview that person, and hopefully we'll sit down and we'll go through a history just like the nurse and the doctor should have done. And a lot of times we'll hear, well, you asked a lot more questions than the nurse and doctor did at the emergency room, and that's because we're trying to make sure that we understand what you made, what complaints you made, and so that we can make sure that you remember exactly what you said and how you said it. And then, the unfortunate thing is it does take a little bit of time because you have to go and get those records then.
A lot of times I think the clients that come in, they think the malpractice is letter A, and it's really letter B. And doesn't that have a lot to do with bedside manner and who they want to bring a lawsuit against?
Yes, absolutely. And there's been studies done about that. If a doctor says, I'm sorry after an event, sometimes the lawsuits drop down in those jurisdictions that has taken place.
Because who wants to sue a doctor that was nice to them and talked to them, even if that doctor may have done something wrong?
Right.
But the doctor who didn't, give them the time of day and shuffled them out of the room, even if that doctor didn't commit malpractice.
Yeah.
Let's get that doctor. Right?
Well, that is human nature, isn't it?
Right.
And that is a problem. But that's our job at that point, is to sort through that and explain to the client, this is what really happened.
Now, I want to get to something very important. We haven't touched on it yet because it gets a little confusing. It's called the statute of limitations. Okay. What is a statute of limitations?
Statute of limitations is a bar from you ever being able to bring your lawsuit. It just stops based on time elapsing. So that's what we're saying in healthcare, where you have to communicate what your problem is. When you think there's something has been done wrong and that the doctor has dropped the ball, you have to make sure you don't drop the ball. You have to get to us first.
Okay, the statute of limitations for medical malpractice in New York State is how many years?
And I want to be careful about that because the general statute of limitations is 2.5 years.
Correct.
Okay.
But there are exceptions.
Exactly.
And what are some of the exceptions?
And the exceptions are city-run hospitals. Right. It's the most classic one. And in the Bronx...
Let's give an example, Lincoln Hospital, let's say, right?
Right.
Now, that wouldn't be a 2.5-year statute of limitations.
That is actually, you have to file a notice of claim within 90 days of being in the hospital for that event.
Okay, a 90-day notice of claim. Fine. Correct. But that's still not starting a lawsuit.
That's just telling the city, I'm going to start a lawsuit. That's all that is.
Fine, so that's your 90 days. But how long do you have to bring an action against the city?
A year and 90 days.
A year and 90 days, okay. But if it didn't involve the city...
And I also want to bring up one other thing, is a lot of the clinics now in the Bronx and Brooklyn and some have been taken over by the federal government. So there's a whole nother layer of federal tort claims acts that have been merged into this statute of limitations.
And by the way, just so the viewers really understand why the statute of limitations is so important with respect to medical malpractice cases, it's not when you think or you learn of your malpractice, even though there'd be no way maybe for you to even know you had malpractice. It's when it actually occurs. Am I correct?
It's the actual event. Let's go back to the breast cancer example that we gave right before the break.
Sure.
That if you have a mammography this year and the doctor says it's fine, but we now know later that it's not fine, you wait for a whole nother year before you go for your second mammography. Well, the whole year has elapsed. Well, think of it as a city hospital.
That's right.
It's already basically already gone before, and you're getting a diagnosis of cancer. Your first instinct isn't, let me go to a lawyer, it's to take care of yourself. So it's very important when you have a lapse of time from the event to be thinking.
You know, but as an aside, though, I think the trial lawyers are trying to change that. So the malpractice, the statute
It's called a
limitations-
discovery rule.
Right, discovery rule. We want the malpractice to start to run from when you learn of the malpractice and not necessarily when it occurred, right? But that's a whole other subject.
That has to do with lobbying up in Albany, and good luck with that.
That'll be resolved. Okay. All right, so now you got your client, and hopefully you're getting the records. What are you looking for to see whether there's any malpractice here?
You're looking for the red flags that we were discussing earlier. We're looking exactly for those things. Was the history taken down appropriately? Was the history ignored? Was the tests that were done, were they not reported appropriately? And we'll also get those x-rays, like you said, with the broken bone, and we'll get them looked at by a radiologist.
Okay. Now, let's give some tips, all right, because I don't have you for much longer. All right, some tips that you would give to somebody who's watching right now, and they think they have been a victim of medical malpractice. What's the first thing you would tell them? Obviously to see you, but what else would you tell them to do, really?
Well, in terms of is to make sure that they then go to the appropriate doctors for real health care, all right? With the cancer victim, making sure they go to an oncologist and making sure they go through the steps of protecting themselves. So that would be my first instinct, is to make sure, and then that's one of the benefits of going to a law firm such as yourself or our firm at Pegalis and Erickson, is we will guide them in the right way, that you have to go see an oncologist now.
And document everything, right? I mean, if you're going to send letters or anything out, it should always be certified, so you at least know what you have,
right?
Correct?
And I think even taking a step back is those tests we were talking about earlier, is making sure you follow up. If you go to a doctor's office, making sure that you give them a call and say, what was the result of that test? Don't assume things were normal.
Okay, before we let you go, let's give some contact information for you. I don't know if we can get it on the screen,
Okay.
but let's find out who you are, where we can reach you, by the way.
Okay, my name's Bob Fallarino, as you know, and the law firm is Pegalis and Erickson, and we have an 800 number. It's called MedMal7, 1-866 MedMal7, so it's easy to get to us. And we're in Lake Success as our main office, but quite frankly, we try cases all over the state.
And by the way, we do have your contact number up there, which is really important. Okay, one last final tip. Give it to the audience.
Be proactive. Communicate, and if something, God forbid, happens, people like us are there to help you.
And if you think there's something wrong, there might be something wrong.
Absolutely.
Good. Don't go anywhere.
Okay.
We're going to have you back one day again, all right?
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Thank you for having me.
that's all for today. It's time to deliberate. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course, you for watching. Remember, if there's a legal issue or a topic you'd like to see on the show, email me at davidlash@bronxnet.org. And until we see you again, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you next time. So.
For those dealing with the struggles of caring for a loved one, we hear you. Visit aarp.org/caregiving for advice and support.
Live with a human for a while, and you get to know a few things. Like, I know she does strange tricks for no treats. But the one thing I will never, for the life of me, know is how she gets so tiny and inside that box. Natalie, how do you get so tiny?